Hi guys. Today I want to talk about understanding your therapist or mental health care professional's role in your therapeutic healing. So today we're going to focus on some of Segall's work and Colin Ross's work. So this part here says the primary goal of therapy with the dissociative client is the integration, assimilation, and transformation of information about past traumatic events into ordinary consciousness, in a way that allows the client to contemplate such information without self-duplicacy and or distress, while permitting the client to develop a less negative self-evaluation. The role of the therapist in this process is primarily to assist the client in the work he or she must do if the goals of therapy are to be achieved. The therapist maintains the treatment frame. This helps the client to become increasingly aware of his or her habitual avoidances. It also helps the client to deepen his or her experience of him or herself, correcting the client's cognitive errors. This also helps modulate the rate of self-discovery so that it is not re-traumatizing. And it supports the client's efforts to experiment with new and less pathological means of controlling and soothing distressing affect and the development of new instrumental behaviors to meet interpersonal goals. Anything that distracts the focus of therapy from these purposes or undermines the role of the therapist in directing therapy towards these goals derails the course of the therapy. So what they're saying in that part there, that section that I just read you, is basically your therapist is a tool, a very important life-saving tool. And to fix that problem, that tool has to be used in that specific setting, hence their office, where they reside. They're also putting on a parent, like Colin Ross talks about, the reparenting role. They're basically parenting you, but in a teacher's standpoint. So per se, your child goes to school, they learn at school, and then they come home. So it's kind of that kind of model of boundaries that you want to have with your therapist. So you can very openly love, care about, and, learn to trust your therapist and have them guide you. But keep in mind, you're going to be leaving to go home. So you are learning while you're at school, hence you're learning while you're in the office about your disorder. Same scenario, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do when you leave that scenario. So, moving on. The therapist who treats dissociative disorders will find that there are many reasons why the client may try to divert the therapist from the therapeutic task, or why the therapist might choose to join with the client in that diversion. Chief among these reasons is the client's belief that he or she needs more than the standard therapeutic relationship to improve. A client may believe, for example, that he or she requires the love and caring he never got from his parents, or that he needs a rescuer of some sort who will play a role in his life outside of the therapist's office. Dissociative clients will try to stretch the limits and boundaries of the treatment frame in myriad ways, sometimes showing a great deal of ingenuity and resourcefulness in this regard. One way they may try to do this is by encouraging the therapist to become suddenly productive at the end of the session. They may choose the last minute of the session to make a statement about suicidal intent. They may initiate spontaneously into a trance. The reason for this wish must be understood and the importance of maintaining boundaries within each hour needs to be re-emphasized. So basically what they're saying here is boundaries are definitely something you need to put into place for you, and your therapist needs to put in boundaries to respect each other. So like a school setting again, something has to give and go. So your therapist can make choices ahead of time, per se, that you have trouble coming back and one of your little alters seems to be very persistent in staying. So your therapist has to put a boundary there. She will have to say, okay, you can be out, but I'm calling someone to come get you. Or I'm having somebody come take you by taxi to go back home. There's choices to be made. And she can also say on the lines of, okay, you got 15 minutes to get so-and-so to come back out to drive you home or to walk home or vice versa. So continue on. That relationship is one of caring enough about the client in the sense that the therapist wishes the client well and hopes he or she can be of benefit to the client. That relationship is one of respect for the client as a person, respect for the client's defenses, and respect for the client's own capacity for growth, change, and healing. It means that the therapist will try not to use the client to get his or her own needs gratified, and will try not to be exploitive or manipulative or involved in the client's relationships or life. It means that the therapist is committed at the deepest level to make the therapy a success, and that part of doing this is safeguarding the frame of therapy to make sure that therapy progresses and that serious misalliances and misadventures do not occur. The therapist may also utilize a variety of techniques that emphasize containment, fractionation, distancing, grounding, safe placing, time distortion, and intuition/modulation of effect to make the pacing of the therapy more tolerable. These techniques enable the client to develop a sense of mastery over intrusive affective states. Recovery involves the growth and strengthening of ego functions, and not the passive re-experiencing of that which the ego is not yet strong enough to endure. Similarly, therapy should emphasize growth, mastery, and autonomy in the present, and is not simply or even primarily an hysterical excavation. I'm having trouble talking. So what they're saying here basically is that a good therapist, will move at your pace. When you feel strong enough, you think you can start getting through some of the memories that your alters may be showing you, then you start to do that. When it gets to be too much, a therapist will know when to pull you back and to stop the process and start over. So you may have to go through a traumatic memory, 5, 10, 15, 20 times. It's how it works, unfortunately. So now we're going to get into a bit of Segall and Ross's section here about boundaries and therapists. A therapist who violates boundaries loses trust, just as a therapist who fails to respect defenses loses trust. Therapy then begins to feel like an unsafe place. The same is true with the issues of the rejection of clients living with the fear that they are. In the last analysis, they presume to be unlovable and undeserving. When therapists fail to respect an ego state, they are rejecting a secret but valued part of that person, one that is hidden from the rest of the world, and that rejection is a narcissistic wound that reinforces the client's worst fears. It also lets the client know that he or she must be on guard with the therapist to prevent future feelings of rejection. Clients can easily turn therapy into a situation where the client keeps the therapist happy in order to keep the therapist from being angry with them, hurting them, or abandoning them. They can inflate the therapist's ego by making the therapist feel wise, kindly, and overprotective. They can be charming and fascinating. They can use their sexuality as a way to keep the therapist's interest. They can fabricate information by telling the therapist what they think the therapist wants to hear. They can also remain sick so as to keep the therapist at their beck and call. If the therapist allies with one of these accommodating ego states, both therapist and client will feel good about the work they're doing. That is being done, but no work will actually be done or accomplished. So I find that part a bit interesting because it's very true. If a client and the therapist feel like they're friends and they're working through something, but they're, collabing together and enticing this behavior, then there's a problem. So this is kind of a touchy subject for me on this part, because I have been through this with a couple therapists where they have crossed serious boundaries. Coming to my home to medicate me, trying to control littles to be out more often than they needed to be because of their lack of not having a child. This is why you will see even some actual DID sufferers on TikTok and YouTube and you name it, trying to educate on DID. But if you notice, they've been on there quite a long time and they don't seem to make progress over a sufficient amount of years. These are huge red flags that you need to watch out for. If they're not progressing or they're not talking about progressing, then we have a problem. Try to avoid those kind of media outlets, especially the ones that are not really educating on DID. They may say they are, but most of their content contains content on collecting money, drama, such as fighting in court or claiming they need funds constantly, being caught between different people, fighting over their trauma, whose is better. Some people do sell makeup stuff, wigs, clothes. These are not things that are educating you and moving your progress along. Those are things that you're going to want to avoid. So I'm going to read this last part of Colin Ross's here. And it states, in terms of transference pressure toward boundary violations by the therapist, I believe that the child alters are the most dangerous alters in the system. They are most likely to provoke over-involvement, rescuing, nurturing responses from therapists, and since they tend to be childlike victims, they are not immediately recognized as architects of avoidance, which they often are. In group therapy, I like to use the motto, when the going gets tough, the kids get going. This is a property of DID personality systems I have observed hundreds of times. When the situation gets too threatening, stressful, confrontational, or otherwise triggering, the system throws out one of the kids to be in executive control. This is usually understood by a patient as a helplessness, trauma-driven, and automatic reaction, but actually, it is a system strategy. Having stated the motto, I pose a question to the group. Why, if the kids are the youngest and most vulnerable, does the system send out kids when things are the toughest? The answer is that the tough, frightening, vindictive perpetrator alters running the system from the background are themselves frightened children. The switch to child alters could be analyzed in transference and psychodynamic terms as a cognitive error or as a system strategy. To my way of thinking, these are usually just alternative vocabularies or understanding the same phenomena. So I'm going to give you my little personal experience with that. My alters, fighting alters, the very aggressive alters, it seems like every time in therapy, when they can't handle a situation or they can't dispute their, how do I put this, their initiative on something, they literally will throw a smaller alter out. And it seems like they do it, my perspective now, because they are testing the therapist to see if she's trustworthy. If she's going to be good with a child, she's going to be good with them. So there's that depiction of that as well. I guess that's all I really have today. I thought this would be something that would be very useful, especially for your therapist and for you. I think that's something that's not talked about very often, is the therapeutic relationship about DID or in DID content. So I thought this would be really useful for you today. And the fact that I'm making so much progress with my own healing, keep in mind this has been 8 years of really intense therapy and 20 years as a, starting point from therapist to therapist and assessment to assessment. So I hope you found this useful, and you're more than welcome to use it in your therapy. And that's all I got today, guys. Love you. Bye.